coaches are being changed, but this also impacts Manny Diaz's decision, which I think should be the biggest priority for Pat Kraft, James Franklin, and the Penn State Nittany Lions, prioritized over an offensive coordinator. But I think keeping Manny Diaz is more important, especially with what you have lingering or what you're going to be potentially losing on defense. The offense is very much intact outside of a couple offensive linemen. The defense, though, could have a lot of question marks going into the offseason, especially if you lose the architect of this defense. But we're talking everything in this episode, but starting with Manny Diaz. It's going to be interesting because he wants a head coaching job. We know that first and foremost. For Manny Diaz, he had the job at Miami of Florida, was the defensive coordinator, and then ultimately the head coach, and then was fired and then landed it at Penn State. So that is the bar that is set for Diaz to return to. He's from Florida. He's going to have, not only does he have head coaching aspirations again, but he's also going to have options this offseason. You had the 1 year, okay, Penn State's defense looks really good. And then you put this season together, and it's like, well, it's downright elite. It's top 5, even with the offense holding the team back in this sense. And places are taking notice of that. There are quite a few options that Manny Diaz could be looking at, but he's not going to settle. And that's the argument that everybody has been making to me, or just in general, is that if Manny Diaz is probably going to stay because a comparable job is not going to open up. And I don't think that's the case. The SEC could be calling, maybe somebody else in the ACC. It really depends what opens up further down the road. I've talked about South Carolina as an option, but Frank Beamer is well liked, even though the record does not really show it. They have been significantly underwhelming. So maybe do they make a change, and maybe they're in over their heads on Frank Beamer. How about Sam Pittman at Arkansas? I don't know that Arkansas is as much of a fit, but if they do want to move on from Sam Pittman, that's an SEC job that could open up for Manny Diaz as well. But I think the one that comes to mind first is Mississippi State, because Mississippi State let go of a first-year head coach. We all know the unfortunate passing of Mike Leach, so the circumstances are a little bit different in this case. But Manny Diaz actually has legitimate connections to Mississippi State and the Bulldogs, Joe Moorhead. So Mississippi State's not afraid to go up to the Big Ten Conference, particularly Penn State, and go get a head coach in a coordinator. Joe Moorhead did it. Could they do it again this time with the defensive guy in Manny Diaz? Well, Manny Diaz had not one, but 2 coaching stints with the Bulldogs as an assistant, but he's familiar with it. He's been down in Starksville. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. Mississippi State has been very clear that they want a former head coach, an active head coach. That seems to be the priority in this case for a lot of these bigger Power 5 programs, is that they don't want to go to a coordinator. They would rather get somebody that is an active head coach and promote that way. Someone who's maybe at a Group 5 or another Power 5 that's just like a Lance Leopold, right, at Kansas, who can definitely move up in this situation. But it looks like that Mississippi State, and this is good news for Penn State, right? We want these schools to make other decisions so that Manny Diaz doesn't get any ideas for Penn State fans here. But Jamie Chadwell, now you can take this with a grain of salt, or you can use this as legitimate evidence here. But Jamie Chadwell is the Liberty head coach for college football enthusiasts. They know him well. For those who don't, yes, he's coached an undefeated Liberty Flames team that lost Hugh Freeze that went over to Auburn, and Chadwell's done an exceptional job with the Flames. But it seems that he's got his location turned on when he makes a post on from his coaching account. And I'm sure that he has an assistant handling that. However, why are you linked to why is your location linked to Starksville, Mississippi? Like I said, this is a good thing. This is a good observation. But he had a tweet saying, hey, let's get ready to go. Liberty Flames fan base. We got a game this weekend. And this was posted in Starksville, Mississippi State territory. So what is he doing there immediately after? And it's not like these programs, so the similar case with Penn State in the offensive coordinator spot. You make that firing, you don't say, well, we're going to wait a couple of weeks and let it simmer. The second that coach is let go, they are on the phones immediately, because then the athletic director, the athletic department, their jobs become on the line if they're not doing all that. Same thing with I mean, in this case for Mississippi State, they don't have a head coach to make those calls like a James Franklin does. James Franklin's going to be making those calls for the offensive coordinator spot. Manny Diaz to Mississippi State. I was a little worried about this one just because of the previous connections. It is comparable, if not better. Miami of Florida has the resources, which is why I would say, and it is Miami of Florida in this case. They used to be a powerhouse in the early 2000s. We know about the legacy there. So Manny Diaz isn't going to take a step backwards because I've heard NC State as a possibility. He coached there as well. NC State's below Miami of Florida. I can't see him doing that. I really can't. But Mississippi State, that's in the SEC. He's coached there. Familiarity. If they're going to go with Jamie Chadwell, by all means, go for it, Mississippi State. Please do. Some other options here. I keep an eye on Texas A&M. I legitimately do because Texas A&M, like Miami of Florida, has all of the resources that it would need in this modern age of college football. I am not advocating or arguing that Texas A&M has Manny Diaz on the highest priority there. I think that's Deion Sanders. I really do. I think the Aggies are going to throw an absurd amount of money to try to get Deion Sanders away from Colorado. I don't know if he makes that decision, but there's two parts to this when you watch the Texas A&M job because it is a massive domino. Whether Manny Diaz is an actual legitimate head coaching candidate for that vacancy is up for debate. Texas A&M could. Man, I think Manny Diaz is good enough to take that. I'm naming SEC jobs here, right? Mississippi State, Texas A&M. One's a little more high profile than the other, but you have all the resources in the world. The college football world. Everybody likes to dunk on Texas A&M and say that it's a cruddy job or it's no good or why would anyone coach there? You have all of the resources to try to build a national contender plus the support. I'm talking about the financial support. I'm also talking about just the general emotional support here, right? They are going to back you tenfold. So Manny Diaz, if he's offered the job, yeah, you take that one, but I don't think he's going to be their top candidate. I really do think that's Deion Sanders. With that being said, if Texas A&M pulls a coach from another program, it's important to keep an eye on Dan Lanning. But Dan Lanning just said that he is committed to Oregon. Okay, so that's a good thing. That's also another domino. What if Dan Lanning, who's very young, he's in his late 30s, what if Dan Lanning moved to another spot like the Texas A&M? Then Oregon opens up, and I think Oregon's a comparable job. Is that level bar for Manny Diaz to take? What about Kalen DeBoer at Washington? That's another one that you need to keep an eye on. If Texas A&M is going to say, hey, we're going to throw tons of money at you. And then again, plus not only the financial, the checks that you're going to get weekly, monthly from this program, you are going to have every single resource at your disposal to build a football program. Kalen DeBoer and Dan Lanning do not make as much money. They would have their salary doubled if they went to Texas A&M. Same case for Manny Diaz, probably tripled. If Penn State now, those are kind of all the realistic jobs here. Again, anything could open up at any time. Manny Diaz is from Florida. He did interview for the FAU job, but I ultimately don't think that was the best fit, even if that's from his area. If Florida ever opened up again, his alma mater is Florida State, but Mike Norvell has pretty much a good hold on that job. I don't think that's going to come open anytime soon. But Florida isn't exactly perfect. The recruiting class is good for 2024, but I feel like it's in flux with some of the recruits that they've lost. Javonte Waller flipped recently to Auburn. If that kind of job ever opened up again and Manny Diaz can stay at Penn State or wherever, if he doesn't go to another head coaching spot, if he still stays as a defensive coordinator at Penn State or another location that's been rumored for him, which I'm going to discuss in just a moment, I think the Florida Gators would make a lot of sense for Manny Diaz if that conversation were to ever happen, if it were. But that's not the case right now. They're not looking to make a head coaching change. But let's talk about that lateral move before we take a break here. USC has been rumored to possibly poach Manny Diaz. USC's going into the Big Ten. This would be a big deal. Manny Diaz hasn't particularly been. He hasn't had a coaching career out in the West Coast. It's been all along the East Coast, right? He's very familiar with this area, but I can't imagine that USC won't break out the checkbook and say, "Hey, Coach Diaz, why don't you make a lateral move here?" So Penn State might have to get into a bidding war to maintain him. I don't know what Manny Diaz's salary is. I anticipate somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $2 to $3 million. It might be more because he's a previous head coach, and Penn State is very lucky to have him. Really, this is a launching pad for what Manny Diaz wants to do. This is not his final spot, but try to keep him around as long as possible if you can. The ones that I am the most worried about are Mississippi State, of course, and then depending on what Texas A&M does. If they are able to pull away a coach from another comparable program, that's going to be concerning because again, it's like the big fish eats little fish, and then that next one down the row is going to continue to eat the food chain. Just something to keep an eye on. I don't think NC State is a legitimate contender, especially since they are having a more or less successful season, right? They are over 500. They're not a playoff contender or conference contender by any means, but that was one. I would say the most threatening spots are USC if they're going to break out the checkbook as a lateral defensive coordinator move, or Mississippi State if they don't ultimately go with a current head coach like a Jamie Chadwell at Liberty. But it's important. I think Manny Diaz staying at Penn State is the biggest priority, especially when you are going to have the question marks. I know should be around the offense because you have the vacancy at OC, but you have Drew Aller coming back. You have Singleton. You have Allen. You could have all three wide receivers coming back. And I know they haven't been great this year. I know they haven't been good this year either. But another year of experience, Dante Cephas, another year in the program, just even if the playbook changes, getting used to the speed of things in the Big Ten and the way that Penn State operates. Tyler Warren's back, right? Andrew Rappley is going to have another year. Yes, you lose Olu Fashanu, but you've been recruiting all these top-tier offensive linemen. The offense, for me, isn't the issue. It's the defense that could hypothetically lose Manny Diaz, Kalen King, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Curtis Jacobs. How about Johnny Dixon, who I think has played his way into a respectable draft spot? Daquan Hardy, does he want to play another year of college football, even though he has the eligibility? How many starters did I just name there? Practically more than half of the defense is gone, including the architect, hypothetically, right? So that's why I think it's more important for Penn State to focus on Manny Diaz. If you had to pick one, and I'm not saying you have to pick one or the other, it'd be great to knock both out of the park. But your bigger priority is keeping Manny Diaz in Happy Valley for at least one more season, if not two or three. We all know he wants to be a head coach again. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.